Sunday, it was the Carfax 400 for the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series at Michigan International Speedway. As the laps wound down, fuel mileage came to play a huge role in the race and the chase.
Drama begins to build in the Irish Hills of Michigan. The battle for the lead is on.
For the moment, Jimmy Johnson's going to power away. He leads by 2 car lengths.
Up front, Brian Vickers all over Jimmy Johnson once again.
Crew Chief Ryan Pemberton may have turned loose of the reins and said, "Go get him, Tiger."
Jimmy Johnson's off the pace. He's coming to pit road. Brian Vickers goes by. Gotta be holding his breath as he hopes he'll make it back around turn 4 to start finish. Brian Vickers is going to do it. Vickers takes the Carfax 400.
Brian Vickers started on the pole, led just 12 of the 200 laps, but led the one that counted the most to score his second career NASCAR Sprint Cup Series win. In doing so, moving up to 13th in the championship standings. Dale Earnhardt Jr. with his second top 5 finish of the year, while Jimmy Johnson and Mark Martin both had bad finishes by running short on fuel late. Let the second guessing begin on the Monday Roundtable edition of NASCAR Now.
NASCAR Now is presented by the Home Depot.
And from the Home Depot Garage Studios, welcome to the Don't Forget to Carry the One edition of the NASCAR Now Monday Roundtable. Fuel strategies, mileage calculations, and the impact on the finish to those who maybe didn't quite estimate correctly. A big part of the discussion as we put on our 2020 hindsight glasses now and talk about it with our panel. Boris said, Angelique Shengelis, Ricky Craven are here. Must have been quite a difference in the Monday morning meetings at Red Bull and at Hendrick, huh?
I would think so. I mean, Red Bull, they gambled correctly. They made it to the end. I think Jimmy Johnson, I think it was a gamble, but I don't really think it hurt him at all. Mark Martin, it hurt him big.
Yeah, and I think from Mark Martin's standpoint, I think Rick Hendrick puts his arm around Mark, and Alan Gustafson says, look, Mark and you are good enough to drive into the chase. Don't gamble, play it safe, and let Mark do his magic.
And I think you have to love the way Ryan Pemberton orchestrated this one. I mean, we talked about Brian Vickers. This was all Pemberton in my mind. Vickers said after the race he wasn't so sure about the call that Ryan was making, but then believed in it. Based on how they raced at Michigan in June, they had it pinpoint. Didn't have to worry about the one.
It was a little bit Vickers, but
yeah, it was. No,
we'll talk about that. And again, another Michigan race comes down to fuel mileage. It keeps happening there. It's a trend. So let's look at how it all played out. Under caution for rain, the drivers who had led most of the race pit with 51 to go. Jimmy Johnson and Mark Martin get 4 tires and fuel. Brian Vickers, slower right, gets right side tires only, wins the race off pit road. Meanwhile, Dale Earnhardt Jr. is among the group who decides not to pit. Vickers restarts 9th, Johnson 13th. On the restart, Jr. moves to the lead. The crowd cheered. Then with 43 to go, caution wave for David Stremme getting turned around.
And this is where the crew chiefs have to make a tough call. Do I pit or do I stay out and gamble on fuel? And here we see 50-50 right now.
Jr. among those who did stop and pit, while Vickers, Johnson, and Mark Martin stayed out, putting Vickers to the lead and Johnson second for the restart. For a couple laps, Vickers held off Johnson, for 2 laps anyway, before Jimmy got out front to the lead. How many thought it was over by then? I did for one once Jimmy got out front.
liked his lane choice here, Alan. I think that was a big part of why he won this race.
Vickers there. Yep, meanwhile on the fresh tires, Junior is trying to charge through the pack on fresh tires and with no fuel concerns, while some of the other guys like Mark Martin are having to worry about fuel while racing each other. So 10 to go now. Vickers begins working Jimmy Johnson over for the lead.
But right now, he's drafting him. He's probably running half throttle down the straightaway, kind of like the Tour de France bicycle guys.
3 to go. Tank runs dry for Jimmy Johnson. Fortunately for him, in turn 4, he ducks to pit road immediately for fuel. Now for Vickers, it's nervous time.
Said he watched the fuel gauge for 2 laps. How do you do that at 200 miles an hour?
On the last lap, the tank ran dry for Mark Martin as well. He coasted to the finish. More on Mark in a minute. Vickers, though, made the gas last and picked up his second Sprint Cup Series win.
All the pains we've gone through and to be a part of the organization since the very beginning, you know, the perseverance and the patience and the hard work that everyone's put through at Red Bull and TRD Toyota to finally get a car in victory lane, man, I tell you, special, and it just isn't the word to describe it.
I mean, we know we're going to be close on fuel. We saw some great teams, you know, stretching it out and running out at the same time. I mean, I had a lot of confidence that Brian was going to get it done, and it just became, you know, it's like those 3 or 4 minutes that last forever, and you know, glad we made it.
You know, we've got to stay focused. We've got to work hard. We can't let our guard down. We've got to stay out of trouble, and we've got to make good calls and have good finishes. We don't have to win every race. We've just got to have good, solid weekends, week in and week out, and we've done that the past 5 weeks. I think if we push ourselves too hard, we'll make mistakes, and if we relax too much, we'll miss the chase. So it's going to be a fine balance. The most important thing, I feel like, is we just need to continue to do the same thing we've been doing for the past several weeks.
So a series of firsts for Brian Vickers and company at Michigan. Vickers scoring his first win of this season. It's the first win ever for the Red Bull team. And Toyota becomes the first foreign-based manufacturer to win a race at Michigan, the home track of the Detroit Big Three. So if Brian Vickers and Jimmy Johnson pitted at the same time, why did the 83 have enough fuel to make the finish and the 48 not?
Well, I think because Jimmy Johnson was leading. You know, he was running out front, hard on the gas. Brian Vickers was able to use the high line and down the straightaway draft behind Brian Vickers and use a lot less fuel. Similar if you're on the highway following a big truck. You can kind of trail off the gas and the truck sucks you along.
I also think it's a mindset, Boris. When you're Jimmy Johnson, you've dominated this race twice now. This is working against you. It's almost, you know, it's destructive because you're like, I can only lose this race on fuel mileage. From Brian Vickers' standpoint, this is my opportunity to beat Jimmy Johnson because I can't catch him, but I can beat him on fuel.
Not just this race. He's dominated the last 3 years of the series.
I think it had everything to do with Ryan Pemberton. No, I'm kidding. Boris is right. I mean, he used Jimmy very well, and I think Jimmy was unaware of how hard Brian was pushing him and forcing him to use that fuel.
It's funny because on the telecast, Rusty Wallace was sitting there saying, Jimmy's got to get in behind Brian. He's got to get in behind Brian. And you're saying that had had something to do with it.
I think so, but don't sell Ryan short. You know, I've raced for Ryan Pemberton a few times, and I think he is one of the best crew chiefs that doesn't really he flies under the radar. You don't hear about him a lot, but he is a championship caliber crew chief, I think. Very calm under pressure. I'm sure he was really nervous at the end, especially when Jimmy ran out of gas, but I'm sure he was coaching Brian a lot during that last bit of the race. Something we were curious about, we took some of NASCAR's timing and scoring data and compared the lap times between Brian Vickers, Jimmy Johnson, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. Earnhardt Jr. is charging through those last laps on fresher tires and with no fuel concerns. Were Johnson and Vickers running much slower than him to try and save fuel? And really, the answer is not really.
No, the numbers don't lie, do they? The fact is that he got to a certain point and stalled, and there wasn't enough difference to make up that gap.
That really shocked me because going back to Pocono, you know, when we saw Tony Stewart in the car, pushing the clutch and coasting through the corners, I really thought as a Monday morning quarterback, Dale Jr. is going to win this race because these guys are going to be coasting around. And they really weren't by the looks of those lap times.
Well, I think you go back to the June race in Michigan, it was the same thing. I mean, Jimmy did not. He and Biffle were racing hard to the finish, and that cost him ultimately. Mark Martin got to inherit the win. But I have to agree, being in Michigan yesterday, when Earnhardt was making his charge, the crowd went nuts. I think everyone was hoping to see Dale Jr. in victory lane again.
I was very curious when Jr. made his last pit stop, the caution that came with 43 to go. That the 83 and the 48, Vickers and Johnson, didn't come back in for at least a splash. Track position, the whole thing turned out to be the key thing for them more than making sure they had fuel to the finish.
I'm not qualified to challenge either of these crew chiefs, but Alan, I got to say that they had to believe they could make it. I mean, they're just too good at what they do.
The problem is with these cars, it's not like you really have a fuel gauge and you can watch him. You're telling your crew chief, he's asking how much gas are you saving me, but do you really know? I mean, you're lifting off a little early, you're coasting, but it's not like a sports car where you can actually watch fuel used on a digital gauge. So, you know, it's really a little bit of a guessing game.
I think that's what makes it fun, though. I mean, drivers don't like fuel mileage races, but to me, that's part of the fun, the calculating, the risks, and not really knowing for sure what you have. I mean, it's the risk that I enjoy in a fuel mileage race.
And it drives you crazy when you're Jimmy Johnson and your crew chiefs in your ear saying, back it down, back it down, back it down, because it changes your rhythm. And Boris, you can speak to it. It's exaggerated on a road course. When somebody tells you to slow down, it changes all your turn-in points, all your braking points.
I hate fuel mileage races. For a driver, it's boring. But what was different about this race versus Michigan in the spring, everybody was on a fuel mileage thing. Here you had guys that went in like Dale Jr. and Joey Logano, took gas and tires and were charging at the end. So I thought that kind of brought something new to it, made it more exciting.
Sometimes it's not about you, Boris. It's about the people watching, you know, and I like it. I think the fans
But drivers want to drive fast.
Give it to them.
But fans, they're the ones who paid the ticket. They're in the seats. They want to see a show. And when you see cars running out of fuel, to me, that's part of the show.
I thought it was a great race. I mean, it was exciting at the end. So entertainment value Valley was the best Michigan I've seen in a long time.
And my last point to bring out is something you mentioned earlier today, Ricky, and you mentioned during the highlight. Brian Vickers' high line was important.
Yeah, and you didn't see Jimmy Johnson up there a lot during the day. And the difference is that taking the high line and being able to coast into the corner, just touch that accelerator, regathers the RPM, about a 400 or 500, maybe more difference between the driver going to the bottom, slowing down, scrubbing off speed, and you use a lot of fuel getting that car back up to RPM.
So the question now becomes for Brian Vickers, as he is 13th in points, is he going to make the chase for the Sprint Cup? Log on to ESPN.com's NASCAR page and cast your vote. We'll have results a little bit later on in the program and, of course, our panel's opinions. Still to come, Vickers was a headline player in Saturday's NASCAR Nationwide Series thriller at Michigan. Did anybody do anything wrong? The race to the chase moves to Thunder Valley. We will talk about who's good and not so good at Bristol a little later in the show. But next, the race for those top 12 positions in points got even closer after Michigan. How costly was a gallon of gas? When the NASCAR Now Monday Roundtable continues.
NASCAR Now, presented by The Home Depot. Visit HomeDepot.com. More saving, more doing. That's the power of the Home Depot.
A look at the race to the chase bubble entering Sunday's Michigan race. Note Mark Martin, 89 points ahead of 13th place. Kyle Busch, 58 points behind 12th. Brian Vickers, 96 points out. My, how things changed. We start with Mark Martin, who had a great race car on Sunday, leading 4 different times, and when he wasn't leading, was running second to Jimmy Johnson most all race. Mark pitted with 51 to go, just like Johnson. Ran a much slower pace in the late laps to try and make sure to make it to the finish, and still ran out on the last lap.
It looked like watching a football team play prevent defense. It just wasn't going to work.
Mark lost 20 positions when the car ran dry on the white flag circuit from 11th to 31st, and he lost a lot of points, too. On June 14th, Martin was able to stretch fuel and win at Michigan. On August 16th, he came up short and finished 31st. Back to the second guessing for just a minute, because we get to do that. Given the 5 teams placing points going into that race, was this a gamble they should have taken?
Well, no. I mean, we have the luxury now looking at it. No, and Alan Gustafson said it was his fault. He made the wrong call. Had the calculations a little off, and clearly a lot off.
I agree. I say no, but you know, Alan Gustafson knows his car, knows Mark Martin. I mean, maybe the fuel cell didn't pick up all the fuel in the tank, and there was still a half a gallon left.
We can say no, but you know what? I'm going to defend him, and I'll tell you why. Because they won the race on fuel mileage in the spring, and it has to be in the back of his mind, and he has to believe he has an advantage.
But they didn't need to win this race. They needed the points to make sure they were in the chase. That's really the only thing I would argue with.
You know, the real complicating factor for Allen in making that call, there were so many cars on the lead lap. There were like 32 cars on the lead lap when it was time to make the decision whether to pit with Junior on that second, the last caution there with like 47 to go. There were 32 cars on the lead lap. If half the guys stay out on the racetrack, now think about all those points you've given up.
So do you play off of Junior or you play off Jimmy?
Well,
it's almost as though they played off Jimmy.
And it's interesting because some of the guys, some of those crew chiefs said before the race, whatever the guys we're racing in points do, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it didn't quite turn out to be that way.
And what surprised me the most is, compared to Jimmy, Mark Martin looked like he really slowed up his pace, and he still didn't make it.
Yeah.
But Jimmy missed by 3 laps.
I'm sorry, I think it's okay to look at the guys who are in the top 6 in points, though. But I think you've got to really, you don't follow what they're doing down the bottom half of that top 12. I do think, in retrospect, we can say whatever. I think it was the wrong decision.
And by the way, just quickly, some numbers. Sunday, Martin pitted with 51 to go. They ran 43 laps of green and 8 laps of yellow. June, the race he won, they ran 44 laps of green at the end of the race. So the numbers weren't much different. A few laps of caution, but enough to make a difference. More bubble drivers. Juan Pablo Montoya, 7th in points going in. Started 3rd. Had a cut tire after some contact with Casey Kane here at lap 142. Little left rear now by the right front corner of the splitter on the 9 car. Montoya lost a lap there. Got a free pass at the lap 157 caution when David Stremme got turned around. So that yellow brought Montoya back onto the lead lap. And from there, he did what he needed to do to try and minimize the damage. Montoya came back to finish 19th. He wasn't happy, though.
You know, I don't know what's the problem with that guy, but he just keeps running into us every time, you know. And Pocono could have won the race, and he came into us, and he just kept saying sorry, and it's got to stop.
What are you going to do about that?
I don't know. Well, we need to talk because that guy needs to stop being such an ass.
Sounded like Angelique's voice doing that interview there.
Yeah, what are you going to do about it?
Did you recommend anything?
I know. Was I instigating? I think I was. I didn't mean to.
He was not a happy camper.
No, he was not. I mean, but he wanted to talk. I mean, he wanted us to come over there, and no, he was not happy. But he also said that he knew, he got what he needed, and he was very careful in this race. Didn't lose any spots in the point standing, so he's in good shape.
Yeah, and clearly that was accidental contact. And what we didn't see on there, I guess it cut his brake line when the tire went, and they had to cap that brake line off. So the crew did a great job getting it back out, only one lap down.
Accidental maybe, but once is a mistake, twice is a trend. And I think he's making a strong statement, and I have to agree with him. Casey Kane is a great driver, and he doesn't do that. But Juan Pablo Montoya is saying and doing what he needs to say. He's Dan.
So what should he do about it?
Well, I think he's going to talk.
Yeah, he's
going
to
make his point like he was trying to do with you.
Right.
And then from there, I think it's up to those two. But I'll tell you something. This is the wrong time of year to be holding a grudge.
And just to make the point with the video that's going here, that the once and twice, the once was Pocono when they got together after, and Casey came over post-race and apologized. The twice was when the same two cars got together at Michigan.
You can apologize, but did you mean it?
Yeah.
Well, and that was the other thing Juan Pablo said. He kept saying, he keeps saying, I'm sorry, but it keeps happening. So I think that this meeting, whenever they have it, will...
Oh, please. It's happened twice. And in these double file restarts, stuff happens. It's not like Casey Kane drove into him or did anything, on purpose. I mean, he just got a little loose, barely touched him. So once he looks at the film, I think Juan Pablo will calm down.
Speaking of Casey Kane, he's one of the bubble guys. His day at Michigan, he was 8th in points entering. Started at the back due to an engine change. Had that contact with Montoya there, but still came through with an 11th place run. It's pretty good from the back.
It was good, and he worked hard for it. He just never looked solid all day, and that was just a glimpse of what he fought.
So again, the back to 11th for Casey Kane on his day. They got the fuel mileage striped. Ryan Newman, 9th in points going in. Started 7th, but struggled. Took time at a lap 55 pit stop to unload the front sway bar.
His car was so bad at the beginning of the race, and he got a couple lucky dogs, I think. They kept working on it, and at the end of the race, he salvaged a top 15 finish, which was amazing.
On the pit stop with 51 to go, they took just right side tires here and tried to gain a little track position. Then they stopped again with 41 to go to top it off. They ended up 15th.
And if you don't get it in practice, guys, you're not going to get it during the race.
We just struggled, especially at the start of the race, and we got it better, but we weren't happy with the car even at the end of the race. The guys did a great job in the pits, on pit stops and making a bunch of chassis changes, and we sacrificed track position every time to work on the race car. And days like this aren't going to win a championship. Days like this might get you in the chase, and we're still working on that part. So, finishing 15th in the chase is not something to be proud of, but we're just working our butts off to get there.
We'll let you finish that thought in a second on Newman, Ricky. Greg Biffle, 10th in points starting Michigan. Started 20th, finished 17th. Really didn't see much or hear much from him all day.
No, and we expected a lot based on how well he ran in the first race.
And how well Roush Fenway traditionally does at Michigan. Pretty invisible day for Greg Biffle. Matt Kenseth on the bubble, 12th in points. Here's a guy we heard from during the day. Started 25th and ran well a lot of the day. They used a little strategy on the lap 54 pit stops to gain some better track position. Right side's only there. And then he ran up into the top 5 for a lot of the race. But the team decided to stay out on the final caution. Then they had to back it down to save fuel. They ran out coming to the line, and Matt Kenseth wound up finishing 14th. How about Kyle Busch? Started 39th, moved up through the race, eventually also got into the top 5. 4 tires with 51 to go was the strategy for the 18 car. Then they stopped again with 41 to go for just right side tires. And for whatever reason, that just didn't work with their car, and the handling went away in the final run, and Kyle Busch faded to 23rd by the checkered flag. And Clint Bowyer, finally 15th in points before the race, started 23rd, ran well, plus didn't pit on the last caution and made the fuel work. Bowyer came up with 8th place money on Sunday. Great strategy by the team, a good driving car, just this one little miscue on the day when he and David Stremme got together when Stremme was trying to back off his teammate. No real damage to the 33 car then. And again, Clint Bowyer finishing 8th on Sunday.
It was a good round. I feel like we ran a little bit better than we finished. We got to get better at that. I got to get better at that. I, over-adjusted a little bit there, asked for an adjustment and got too loose. Couldn't go on them restarts. And you get bottled down on the bottom on them restarts, and 4 or 5 of them get around you, and it takes the whole run to get them back. And that was just the case. It was unfortunate, but we're still chugging along. We're still doing the right things. I don't think we gained on 12th, but we're doing what we need to do, keeping the pressure on.
So back to the bubble standings now after Michigan. Matt Kenseth and Mark Martin swap 11th and 12th places, but Kenseth loses 26 points on 13th place, and Martin loses 77 points to 13th. Brian Vickers, now the 13th place guy. He goes from 96 points out to just 12 out. Clint Boyer from 99 to 58 out. Kyle Busch drops a dozen points to the bubble, 58 to 70 with 3 races to go. You were saying?
Brian interrupted me. But, when you have a poor practice or qualify poorly, with all this pressure, what happens is it carries over into the race. Instead of fine-tuning the car, you find yourself adjusting as though you're in practice, and it's a hard way to go through the day. And for Ryan Newman, this is a tough position because with 3 races to go, he's got to be looking over his shoulder. And you go to Bristol looking over your shoulder, that's trouble.
Thoughts on any of the other bubble people? Anybody want to talk about?
Well, Clint Boyer, he is sneaky good. We didn't think he had a chance to make this chase, and every weekend you don't hear about him in the race. He's not hitting anybody. He's not getting any wrecks, but there he is at the end of the race in the top 10, so he could sneak his way in there.
Kyle Busch.
Okay.
Didn't get a chance to talk to him yesterday. He walked by me faster than he qualified on Saturday, I think. And I just really think that he's going to a track where obviously he's performed well at Bristol, but I just think the mentality, his approach is not there right now, and I think he's extremely frustrated. I think he's going to be outside looking in.
And it'll be interesting to see in hindsight, we talk about momentum, what running out of gas does for Mark Martin. And what winning does for Brian Vickers as this whole thing accordioned back together now heading to Bristol with 3 races to go. Coming up, how will the Bristol bump and grind impact the chase? Pun intended. That's a little bit later on NASCAR Now. But up next, more from Michigan, including a look at the day's few incidents and the resulting rowdy restarts. That next on the NASCAR Now Monday Roundtable.
Full Throttle is brought to you by Degree B12.
The NASCAR Sprint Cup Series races at the Michigan International Speedway for the 81st time. And with the championship cutoff closing in, it could be a big day for a number of drivers.
All right, guys, got a really good car. Let's put it at victory lane.
Green flag is in the air. Brian Vickers on the gas.
See Mark Martin racing hard for this first lap. He wants to get these 5 bonus points.
He will lead them the first time by.
Pull it away, bud. Pull it away. We're about a tenth and a half off that 5 car. How big a swing do you want me to take to free that thing up through the middle? Tenth and a half.
Here's Jimmy Johnson back on the offense. Fender up alongside of Martin.
New leader, 48.
Look at the different lines on this racetrack. Just amazing. We got 2 and 3, sometimes 4 wide.
Another guy struggling right now, the 18 car, Kyle Busch.
Montoya sideways. Oh, they got a flat tire.
His hopes for the chase, taking a blow. He's going to try and get it to pit road.
Get his fire off. Get his fire off. Come on. Go. All the way out.
Man, that's too bad for Montoya.
I think that we're going to go ahead and take 4 tires here. You okay with that? If we do what the masters do, we'll be in good shape. I don't think they're going to answer if I ask them what they're going to do. That's the problem. Right side tires. Right side. Come on down. Get it full. You ready? Take it there. Go. Get to the wall.
Race off of pit road and look at the 2 tires for Vickers.
Damn good stuff. That's what I'm talking about. Can we make it to the end from here to be safe fuel? We can make it. We're good. Saving everything I can. About like last time. If we can get this thing out front, you can pace yourself. We might be able to make go like hell, but
The battle for the lead is on.
Jimmy Johnson's going to power away.
doing the 83, man. Nobody else is going to be able to get to you guys. Just a matter of whether or not we can make it. I have a feeling I'll burn more gas this run than last. Pretty aggressive with the throttle.
Looks like Vickers might catch Johnson here and get this lead.
I know you've done a great job saving fuel. He's the only one you need to beat right now. We need to save about 2.5 laps of fuel. If you think you saved us that much, you just stay ahead of him. But man, I'm out.
Jimmy Johnson's off the pace. He's coming to pit road. Brian Vickers takes over the lead.
Just be smart here.
just under a second and a half behind Vickers.
Here to go. Smooth, smooth, smooth. Need you to talk to me every lap about what I'm doing here. Don't leave it all on my shoulder. Stay the best you can. Save, save, save.
Here's Mark Martin losing spots.
We're out.
Brian Vickers looks like he's going to make it happen. Jeff Gordon will come second.
Coming down for the checkered flag, Ryan Vickers does it at Michigan.
That's what I'm talking about, boss man. Hell yeah, good job. How about that first win for Red Bull? Great call. Great job, guys. Hell yeah.
As we look at our full throttle race recap, Brian Vickers' win was his 6th consecutive finish of 11th or better. He's moved up 4 spots in points during that run. Jeff Gordon led a Cup race for the 1,000th time in his career. And Joey Logano finished 7th at Michigan, his first top 10 result since his New Hampshire victory. So, impressive day for Brian Vickers and company. Just a few incidents on Sunday from the Michigan race. Not really a whole lot of spinning and crashing. So why don't we look at them and talk about them? Lap 121, Kurt Busch in the 2, David Reagan in the 6. Off turn 2, trouble.
Looks like Kurt just slid up the racetrack a little bit and barely got into the 6 car and spun him.
There's another look. That's off turn 4. Sam Hornish and David Reagan. David got the doubleheader there. And then the final yellow for David Stremme off turn 4. And he gets spun around a little bit. 7 cautions for 31 laps, right about average for Michigan. Wasn't any more, wasn't any less. It was right about average.
Yeah, and it speaks to why drivers like Michigan, because they have options. They have room to move around if the car isn't perfect, and they're not perfect anymore. So, you know, the drivers favor this track, and I thought the car put on a good show because of it.
Some of those restarts, they were 4 and 5 wide. I mean, it was crazy.
It was awesome, wasn't it?
You said restarts? We have restarts. Those cautions produced a few probably hair-raising moments for the guys both in the grandstand and in the cars.
When you're in the middle of this path, it's turbulent, like being in choppy air in an aircraft.
Really? That can't be fun. Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 5 wide. Great stuff. We were all talking amongst ourselves during the commercial that NASCAR likes it said shootout style, but the double file restarts that we all grew up with watching short track races coming to this level of racing might be the single greatest race procedure change ever made.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you don't buy into that, then you're missing the best part of the show. And these drivers are actually starting to accept it more. It's almost as though they're saying, look, we can't fight it. It's here to stay. It's good for the sport. And I think that they've used great sense since they adopted it. You notice there haven't really been a lot of incidents.
Yeah. I think since it started, they've maybe calmed down just 10% maybe. It's not so crazy and wild, but for a driver, it's still so intense, these double file restarts, but for the fans, it's exciting. I mean, I love watching it.
2 brief things just to mention that we'd be really remiss if we didn't follow up on. Sam Hornish Jr., top 5 finish again.
He is really, I mean, I spoke to Roger Penske before the race on Sunday, and he said, look, it takes a guy like Sam coming from an open wheel series, whatever series, not comfortable with these cars, the heaviness of the cars, takes about 3 years. And I think we're finally seeing Sam Hornish feel very comfortable with it. He's a smart driver. I mean, he's won the Indy 500. That, you know, he's certainly got the credentials to race in this series, and we're seeing it finally.
And his teammate, David Stremme, was it the phrase you used before about Boyer, sneaky?
Yeah.
David Stremme came back for a great finish on Sunday as well, and we never saw him all day except when he got sent spinning off turn 4.
Because he was trying to be a good guy and get off Clint Boyer, and then he got rear-ended and got spun out.
So nice job for David finishing 13th on the race, and again, Sam Hornish with a top 5 finish. Later, the NASCAR Nationwide Series finished from Saturday and the interesting post-race press conference that followed. But up next, the night race at Bristol, a preview of what to expect when the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series hits Thunder Valley this weekend.
Welcome back to NASCAR Now, presented by the Home Depot.
See the back end of the 18 kick out.
Okay, he got into it right there.
Moved him out of the way.
I just had to ask myself, would he do that to me?
Kyle Busch pushes on Edwards into 3.
And he has before.
The bump and run, the Bristol move.
You don't try to hit somebody. You know, it's just his normal fashion.
Don't think anyone's heading to the exits early tonight. They want to stick around and watch Carl Edwards' patented backflip.
Carl Edwards will come down and win. A little nudge here from Kyle Busch.
Now Kyle Busch is going after him.
I just got into him a little bit and let him know that I didn't appreciate the way he passed me. I'm not apologizing. If I had to do over again, I might just hit him harder. They keep talking about rivalries. We might have one now.
So, with the race to the chase headed to Bristol, what does past performance tell us about what to expect? Well, Kyle Busch has the best average finish at Bristol among Bubble Boys. 9 starts, 2 wins, 6 top 10s. The driver with the worst average, Brian Vickers, a 26th place average in 10 starts. Let's take a minute and discuss the difference between the day and night Bristol races from the car perspective. Ray Evernham at our Home Depot cutaway car.
Wow, Saturday night short track racing at Bristol. And this car would be perfect for it because it's got half a body on it. And that's what most of those cars will look like after the race. But besides using up the body at Bristol, one of the biggest things that happens between the spring race and the summer race is the track gets slick. Now you can soften springs and you can change wedge and change tire pressure, but one of the biggest gains the guys are going to make are right here in the shock absorbers. I've always found that it takes a much different shock absorber setup to run well in the race in the summertime than it does compared to the race in the springtime. For NASCAR Now, I'm Ray Evernham.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. So Tony Stewart has locked in his place in the chase. Anyone 391 or more points ahead of 13th after Bristol will clinch. The only guys who can do that are Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon. After Michigan, all those from 26th in points on down were mathematically eliminated. Anyone 391 or more behind 12th place will be eliminated after Bristol. Got all those numbers? I thought so. Jeff Gordon, 437 ahead of 13th. Jimmy Johnson, 418 ahead of 13th going into Bristol. They're both going to be in the chase, right? The only thing they have to worry about this weekend is win.
Right. They want those 10 extra bonus points for the win, so when the chase starts, they'll be ahead of their other guys.
And a big part of that equation is qualifying well because pit road is a nightmare. Good pit stall.
Same for Tony Stewart, by the way. Just win and get bonus points. So Tony, by the way, anybody else surprised by the big lead Tony has over second place in points overall? I was.
Yeah, I've given up being surprised.
Okay.
You know, it's just amazing what he's done this year.
I like it. I think it's great for the sport. I think that's been the best story of the year in my mind, and Ryan Newman. I mean, I think if Ryan gets in the chase, that's a pretty stellar story. First year to be able to do that.
So let's talk about the bubble people now, the Brian Vickers, the Kyle Busches, the guys just inside like Mark Martin and like Matt Kenseth. This cannot be a very comfortable feeling going to Bristol with the margin for error like that.
No, and those numbers, I think, stick with the drivers a little bit. Brian Vickers does have momentum, and I believe in it, but a 26th place average doesn't help your cause. This is also not a place to have the grudge that I was referring to earlier, where, you know, you can get into guys here just because you're racing, not because you're trying. And 2 short track races and the final 3 events, I think this is going to be a lot of drama.
But here, if you just cut a tire down and have to pit on the green, you're going to lose 2, maybe 3 laps.
When you're a driver going into this race, are you really thinking, what did I do before in this race? Is it really stuck in your head, or are you just focusing in on this upcoming race?
Prior performance does matter, and the fact is, when you go into this race, you want to qualify as well as you can. That's the only chance you have to start with a little bit of an advantage. And then if you lose that on pit road, you struggle all day long to play catch-up. And if you try too hard at Bristol, try too hard anywhere, you get in trouble. Try too hard at Bristol, it's a disaster.
Here's something I was thinking about, and follow up off what you mentioned, Boris, before about if you cut a tire or get laps down. I think we're going to see the wave around be a huge thing at Bristol. Cautions tend to come in bunches at a place like that. You get one long run in a Bristol race, and then you get a bunch of cautions. If you know, fuel, you can go a long ways on fuel there. I'm taking that wave around every time if I get a couple laps down or a lap down, and taking my chances on another caution before I need fuel.
Especially with the double file restarts. We haven't seen those at Bristol yet, so you know cautions will breed cautions, especially here.
And I'm really curious to see which lane choice. You know, the bottom has always been the preferred groove because you can get the edge getting in, wiggle them out of the room, you know, coming off the corner. But the high side seems to be favorable so far this year on this double file restart, and it's almost because the guys are comfortable with it. They've been restarting on the outside with the lap cars on the inside previously. The outside lane seems to be dominant for the leader.
Something to watch for as well Saturday night. Wave arounds, outside lane for the double file restarts, and more. Up next, our Hot Lap segment. We'll talk racers at the White House, which is going to happen on Wednesday of this week. And we'll talk Toyota winning in Michigan. Big deal or not? That's next on the NASCAR Now Monday Roundtable. On Wednesday, a special NASCAR Now at a special time, a 1-hour show from the White House. Last year's top 12 drivers plus former champs visit with the president. NASCAR Now from the White House, Wednesday, 4:30 Eastern on ESPN2. Time for Hot Laps, where we talk about a couple of topics in discussion in the racing world this week. Anybody ever been to the White House? Yeah? Yeah?
I've
Is it
been
cool?
3 times with national championship teams. It's really, really an amazing thing just to be there. Doesn't matter what your affiliation is. When you see the president, it's amazing.
I lived in Washington, D.C. for about a year. I walked by the White House a couple times, but I've never been inside the fence. It doesn't really count. So it should be really interesting to see what happens when this whole group, Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, Rusty and DJ are going to be there, Brian France, and you know, go to the White House and get a chance to meet President Obama, especially, you know, not to bring politics into it, but NASCAR has been considered for years a very heavily Republican sport, and so this is an interesting meeting coming up, and it should be a lot of fun.
What an honor.
Yeah. Next topic, Toyota winning in the backyard of the Detroit Big Three automakers. That's what happened on Sunday out at Michigan. Angelique, you live in the Detroit area. Was there any real reaction to Toyota winning at Michigan?
Well, I think we discussed this. Okay, I think that at the rate when the fans see a winner, they see a great finish like that, they were cheering for Brian Vickers. But I think when you look at the corporate side, this is not a good thing for Detroit to have Toyota come into their backyard, which Michigan International Speedway is, and win. I mean, it really, I don't think it sat well in any of the board meetings today on Monday.
And I've been there as a driver representing Ford and Chevrolet, and trust me, they circle the calendar. It's a big deal for the employees. It's a big deal for the organization. And I have to believe on Monday morning they feel like the away team came in and stole one on their home court.
I don't know, but I mean, I don't really know how many fans actually knew it was a Toyota, because all the cars look pretty much the same to me, aside from a guy like Jack Roush, who definitely probably, he didn't like when Toyota wins. But, I mean, I didn't see any resentment. Everyone seemed happy. A lot of cheers for Brian Vickers. So, you know, maybe it's more of a corporate thing.
Is this a good thing, though, for the sport? I mean, it's become a little more homogenized, maybe, that people don't?
Question. Because, you know, all of us going back to our earliest days understood that there was such loyalty and such commitment and dedication to the brands back then. And I really can't speak to whether that exists today or not. I assume it does, but, you know, when you hear them cheering in Michigan, it makes you wonder.
The cars all being alike, the template matching program that NASCAR began got to be that way to eliminate an aspect of the sport that people didn't like, which was the whining about this car's got an advantage, so change the rules and that. And so that's how that came to be. But now all the cars do look alike, which is good from a competition standpoint, but is it good from a fan standpoint? Does a fan still look at a car and say, that's a Ford? I don't know.
I think it's a bad thing. I mean, I saw the picture of the new Nationwide car that looked like a Mustang, and I thought that was pretty cool looking. And I think NASCAR needs to do something to make the cars look more like the brand.
Well, how about Casey Kane and his photo shoot the other day with Budweiser? It was a Toyota, not a Dodge.
Was it?
Yes, it was.
Okay, well, maybe there's some news there.
Maybe it means something, or maybe no one can tell the difference.
Remember when Dale Jr. got in that Hendrick car and drove it for a few laps? Didn't mean anything at the time when Kyle Busch left, but as we know now, it meant a lot.
Yeah. Up next on the NASCAR Now Monday Roundtable, the terrific finish of Saturday's NASCAR Nationwide Series race at Michigan, and the interesting post-race press conference afterwards.
This is NASCAR Now, presented by the Home Depot.
Saturday, the NASCAR Nationwide Series race at Michigan. Kyle Busch leading the points by a good chunk going in. Carl Edwards could use a win to start making a move towards the title. Wrong move at lap 3.
That is an uncharacteristic move by Carl Edwards. I can't remember the last time I ever saw him make a mistake like that.
Came down and brushed Trevor Bayne's 99 car, wound up in the wall, done for the day, finished 40th. Brian Vickers and Kyle Busch, 32 and 18 respectively, ran 1-2 most of the race. Into the final laps, Vickers leading, and it gets kind of interesting.
See how loose Brian is, and he keeps saving that car?
And Kyle Busch had to hesitate, I think, or he would have made that pass.
So while Vickers is trying to hold off Kyle Busch, here comes Brad Keselowski. And he goes around all of them on the last lap. And there's your winning pass. Coming to the checkered flag, Brad Keselowski with a huge win in Michigan for him, his home state. Meanwhile, Kyle and Vickers had a discussion on pit road, and then the post-race press conference was kind of interesting.
Maybe they're making dinner plans.
There at the end, you know, he bobbled in 3. I got under him coming off of 4 and got all the way down to the grass trying to get away from him, and he just hung on my right rear quarter panel side drafting me and wasn't paying attention to the mirror that the 88 was coming. I knew the 88 was coming, and man, I mean, I was stuck. I had nowhere to go. If I would have moved up, I would have been into him. If I would have gone lower, I would have been in the dirt. So I had nothing to do. It was just unfortunate there that the side draft played that big a role and lost both the winning cars a chance to win the race.
You know, I didn't realize it was my job to let him go and win the race. At that point, coming to the white flag, whether the 88 was coming or not, it's irrelevant. My job's to try to win the race. It's the last lap. And at that point, the greatest threat was the 18. You know, I was side drafting him just like he was side drafting me all day. That's what we do. That's what we race for. My job's to win the race, and that's what I was trying to do.
Ever since Richmond, I've had a problem with him, racing with him on the racetrack. So this is just another escalation of that. And he'll be up front tomorrow. I'll be in the back, so we won't have anything tomorrow.
You know, I'm going to race people the way they race me. We were racing for the win. You know, I mean, Kyle, if you're going to be upset about that, I mean, I'm sorry. That's my job, is to try to win the race. If anybody else disagrees, if anybody else thinks I should have just rolled out of it and let Kyle win, then please raise your hand. I don't know what else I'm supposed to do. I'm fine. The only thing I'm mad about was the way he handled it after the race. I'm sure we can get past that. I want to have a good race tomorrow. But there again, I'm always going to race everybody the way they race me.
Amazing, isn't it? That these two guys have this thing on the track racing for the win, and they have to sit side by side in the media center, and they talk just like that. It was fascinating stuff.
Never looked at each other once, though, and the body language was pretty telling. I take Vickers in this one, definitely.
I think the body language tells you that there's 2 less Christmas cards that are going to be sent out this year for sure. They do not look friendly.
You ever have a post-race situation like that where something happened on the racetrack and then you had to go literally sit right next to the guy?
Everything except that sitting next to him part.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think either of them planned on that. And, you know, I got to give a tip of the cap here to Kyle Busch in one regard, and that is that he had a big points day over Carl Edwards, and he didn't care. And so you got to give him credit for being consistent. But having said that, I agree with him almost always when he's on the racetrack, and I agree with him almost never when he's doing an interview, because Brian Vickers did nothing wrong, in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, Kyle Busch is a great race car driver, but he's whining like a baby here. I mean, Brian Vickers did nothing wrong, didn't touch him, didn't get into him. I mean, he's just a sore loser because he didn't win again.
Well, Brian called it the Kyle Busch show, didn't he? I mean, it's sort of like, this is why you and I are separated too, by the way, because it's, you know, always the Boris said show. But, no, I mean, I think Brian was absolutely right. I think he did the right thing. He was trying to win the race, and Keselowski, maybe he did get lucky. That's what Kyle Busch said. Wrong guy won.
And the one thing I like about Kyle, he wants to win more than anything, and when he doesn't win, he's miserable, but he needs to keep it into himself a little bit and maybe get a little more positive attitude. It might have a better effect on his racing.
I disagree with you. I thought the way Kyle Busch handled things after the race was the best we've seen him handle it. Part of this he got out of the car, he did the interviews, he did them without attitude, he told us exactly what he thought. How do you blame him for saying that?
And that's the point I was trying to make, is that you got to give him credit for being consistent. How is this any different than any other interview he's had when he's finished second?
Well, he spoke this time. Sometimes he doesn't speak. I mean, like after yesterday.
So
I mean,
give him credit for it.
I'll give him credit for it.
I tell you, though, 2 weeks ago at Watkins Glen, we rode around in a pickup truck together around the track before the start of the race, and the people that boo him, it was amazing. And I don't see it. I mean, I think he's a great race car driver. He's entertaining when he gets interviewed, but he needs to do a little something to get a little better.
Why? Somebody's got to wear the black hat. That's in the history of the sport.
Unless it's not
wear the
important
black hat.
Yeah,
so.
unless it's not important to him.
Yeah.
I guess.
All right, out of time on this one. Kyle with a big, huge lead in the Nationwide Series Championship. We're coming back for news and notes and final thoughts next, and maybe we'll still be talking about this when we come back from the break.
NASCAR Now, presented by The Home Depot. Visit HomeDepot.com. More saving, more doing. That's the power of The Home Depot.
Wednesday Night Baseball presented by Smirnoff Ice, the Boston Red Sox, and Toronto Blue Jays. In Toronto, 7 Eastern, ESPN2. Then Sunday Night Baseball presented by Taco Bell. It's the Red Sox and Yankees at Fenway. 8 Eastern, Sunday night on ESPN. Lug notes now. Jeremy Mayfield's stepmother, Lisa, arrested Saturday night after an incident at Jeremy's home in North Carolina. Lisa Mayfield charged with public intoxication and had warrants issued for 4 counts of simple assault and second-degree trespassing. The saga continues. Drive for Diversity competitor Paulie Haraka scored his first NASCAR Camping World West win in Colorado's National Speedway Saturday. And 11 engines impounded by NASCAR at Michigan. 3 Toyotas, 4 Chevys, 2 Fords, 2 Dodges. This after the Cup race, they were taken to the R&D Center for comparative testing. We asked you, will Brian Vickers make the chase using that momentum off of his win? It looks like most of you said no, but it's close, 54-46. All right, we'll find out. All right, got about a half a minute left. Final thought?
I love this chase format. I mean, these next 3 races are going to be so exciting. Not who wins, but who makes the chase. And once that's over, it all starts again to see who wins the championship. So I'm excited about it.
I found Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s comments on Friday very interesting about changing the car, and then obviously I think we all think he spoke out of frustration, but I think that NASCAR should consider what he said, but there will be no changes to the car.
Thank you for the lead. If this car's so bad, why do we have 8 or 9 guys battling for the final few spots?
Tomorrow, Casey Kane, Tony Stewart, and Teddy Christopher from Bristol, where the Modifieds begin their first practice. That's Tuesday. See ya.